Finally, I saw the new Hunger Games movie, and somehow managed to avoid all spoilers before doing so. This comes as a real shock to me because not only has the book been out for like 3 years now, but for the past 3 months, my TikTok feed has been aggressively leaning into the Hunger Games movies and their apparent cultural resurgence. And for the past 3 weeks, or at least what feels like 3 weeks at this point, I have been inundated with an insane amount of Josh Hutcherson edits to the point where another thing I was surprised by was just how sympathetic the genocidal, classist President Snow turned out to be. I went into this movie knowing that it had a perspective that was pretty glued to Coriolanus, and I had heard that a lot of the audience felt themselves feeling with him a lot more than they thought they should have. And even with this foreknowledge, and with me telling myself repeatedly on the way into the theater that I was not going to feel bad with, or resonate with, the mass murderer, I kind of failed. The young President Snow was extremely convincing and hard to not feel for throughout the film, even with his incredibly despicable and evil acts. This just goes to show you that you should never underestimate the power of twinks. Anyway, humor aside, there are a few elements of Songbirds and Snakes that I feel are worth discussing a bit further. One, as mentioned, was the sympathy garnered for a character who the fan base for this franchise has been conditioned to hate since day one. I know this isn't the first time the villains have had their supporters. I mean, Star Wars basically runs on fascist sympathizers who misses the point as of lately, but that's different. Star Wars bad guys, and most other bad guys who get weird fandoms at some point, usually at least look cool. Coriolanus Snow, in the original films, did not look cool. His first name quite literally has the word anus in it. That is patently uncool. Yet somehow, some way, within the first few minutes of Songbirds and Snakes, Corio is someone we can latch onto and sympathize with, even though we know exactly what his actions will be leading to for the characters we initially resonated with in the first place. Props to Suzanne Collins for pulling this off, and to Michael Arndt and Michael Leslie for adapting this sympathy to the screen so effectively. Not only do we sympathize with him at first, but even as he descends on his path to villainy and becomes this disgusting character we see in the original trilogy, we can understand him. Each action is rationalized in one way or another, and for brief moments you can almost find yourself feeling for the guy, or knowing why he did what he did. You can almost see how the lies he tells himself could work. Almost. It isn't until the end, when Coriolanus is nearly completely off the deep end, swimming in a pool of blood that's on his hands, that you realize his descent is fully complete. There is no longer any functional difference between the Corio we met at the beginning of the film and the monster we're reintroduced to alongside Katniss Everdeen so many years later. Beyond this, I want to praise Rachel Zegler's performance for this movie. At first, I was frankly ready to despise her character. She was in the equivalent of the Panem Glee Club, which is strike 1, and she was also seemingly proud of this, which is strike 2. She very nearly caught her third strike in her opening scene when she started open mic night at the Reaping, but somehow my harshness I had prepared for her seemed to fade with each passing second she was on screen. No small reason for this is the fact that all of her songs slap. If you're going to be singing at inopportune times, you better make it good. And Lucy Gray made damn sure that it was good. I mean, I went from being like, no way this chick is busting out a ballad during the Reaping, to, oh damn, you sing that shit, let's go! When that container burst and she started her swan song as the snakes slithered over her. I don't think I've ever so quickly changed my tune on a performer since my uncultured ass was educated about Olivia Rodrigo during her first album. And speaking of this, all of the music in this film slaps. Not just the singing, but the original scores too. I think they heard J-Law sing Hanging Tree back in the day and knew they needed to come correct when Lionsgate turned on those mics in the recording booth. Because as far as I can tell, not a single track missed. Not the dance music in the District 12 Tavern, not the end credits song by Olivia Rodrigo, not one bit of the orchestral scores whenever it would cut into the intense moments during the 10th annual Hunger Games. The diegetic songs in this film also had a sort of folksy country twang that hit the perfect notes for me time and time again, despite the fact that I don't even like country music. And funny enough, even though this is a prequel that is essentially meaningless, it's still very captivating. There's only one character in the movie who really overlaps with any significance to the other movies in the franchise, and we know exactly what becomes of that character. They win. Nothing too terrible befalls them, they rise to power, and they have incredible success and opulence later in their life. By all accounts, we should not give two shits about anything going down in this movie, because the stakes are on the floor, more or less. Our protagonist is safe and clear, his story is already written. But still, we care. Why? Why do we care more about this than about Marvel characters with new stories to explore or moments to experience? Why do we care more about the tributes from the 12 districts who we know all die than the next team of heroes that will make up the Avengers? I would argue, in a word, gravitas. When we resonate with our characters, we believe what they do, we feel what they feel, and we take seriously and invest ourselves in the same things they take seriously and invest themselves in. To every single person on screen for these 2.5 hours, these games are life and death. They will break everyone from every district competing in them, and they have the potential to make so many students in the capital, including choreo. There's never one joke or snide remark or funny comment making light of the games. There's never anything that downplays the seriousness of the tension between the districts and the capital. Sure, there are moments of levity, of humor, of charm, but never at the expense of the looming threats in the narrative. There's never anything to suggest what happens on screen is anything less than the worst possible reality all of these characters could be put through. And for that reason, it's so much easier to care about and feel for each beat of the story as it happens. Everything plays out in a way that you can sort of see coming, but not in a way that makes it feel predictable. It does so more in the way where you know a car is going to crash, or you can see a bridge about to buckle, or you can see an injury that's about to take place during a sports event. All of it leads in a clear but fuzzy way towards tragedy that's just inevitable. Snow takes one life, then another, then another. We see the fate of Sejanus about to befall him. We see Snow's fallout and eventual turning on Lucy Gray. We see the bodies piled up so that Coriolanus can ascend to where he feels he needs to be, where he feels he belongs. We feel these underpinnings of hate and blame that pour out of him to corrupt his actions as they happen, even though they may be made initially with seemingly pure intentions. A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is not subtle by any definition, and it does not try to be. President Snow's outfits are stained more and more deeply red the further he walks down this path of bloodshed. One of our main characters sings many a song almost directly to the audience, detailing the themes of the story and the strifes of the dystopia she finds herself in. Every character will firmly state their beliefs and stances with full conviction again and again. There is the most telegraphed, yet sad and effective, rabies foreshadowing in human history. But all of this works because of how real it feels to every character on screen, how real and at home it feels in this world that Suzanne Collins created. And with this, even with all the elements of Songbirds and Snakes that tie back into the original trilogy, it works. The hanging tree is a central element to this story, and it makes sense that it's a central element. It feels like the story of Choreo and Lucy Gray had to be built under those looming branches. It's not something that was simply tacked on to get fans of the originals into their seats and to lean forward, pointing in their chairs like,
whoa, whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
And this is the case not only for the hanging tree, but for everything else you might recognize from the first trilogy. Sure, there are nods to the originals, and maybe it leans a bit into fan service at times, but never does Songbirds and Snakes do so in a way that takes away from the central narrative, or its themes, or the story of the scene in the moment. There's Flickerman, there's the tree, there's certain plants that get a certain name, there's jabberjays, there's the origin of a certain particular gesture, but all of it works. All of it is set to flash us forward, reminding us of the originals. And in those originals, it was served to remind President Snow of this tumultuous, awful, prolonged moment of strife and suffering in his own life, in his own past. A time he likely hates by the time he's forced by Katniss Everdeen to remember it. It works not only for the audience, but for him. It adds another layer to the experiences of the characters in the story. So for me, that's the kind of fan service that I would actually want. Don't reward me for recognizing a word or understanding some vague reference, or being able to identify a character that I know from somewhere else. Give me something familiar, but something that I know would impact the characters of your story in a certain way, and let me think about how that familiarity, how that rhyme in the story, might change what I already know about another story. For that sort of execution, that sort of handcrafted experience that so rarely comes to pass in a box office juggernaut these days, I'd rate A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes 3.5 out of 5 stars. It isn't perfect, but it is really good and very well made. It's not some cheap imitation echoing out the original, but has something all its own to say with its unique voice and fresh style. It's a story that frankly is far more captivating than you'd think it has any right to be. If you enjoyed the originals in any capacity, give Songbirds and Snakes a watch. If you've never seen a Hunger Games movie before in your life, give Songbirds and Snakes a watch. It's more than strong enough to stand on its own. Until next time.